Hello, Paul. Namaste. I'm in a meeting. I'll meet with you. So, hello, Paul Bhai. Namaskar and greetings to all friends.
Hello, Anatabai.
Hello, hello. Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
So, hello, Randir. We can begin, please. So, dear and respected friends, so it is a joy to be together. Slowly, some other friends would join in, and we are also in our Facebook and YouTube platform. So it is a joy for us to be on this day, January 16. In 2019, on this day, ChittaRanjan Das left his body, and we have been engaging, working and meditating with his work, his life, in our own humble ways. And from this year, we have initiated a Vishwaneedam ChittaRanjan annual memorial lecture. So we are very, blessed to have the presence and presentation of our dear and respected Paul Bhai, Sri Paul Swatruba, to present this first ChittaRanjan Das Memorial Lecture. And he would be gifting us a very inviting meditation on ChittaRanjan Das and Ivan Illich on the theme of deschooling on learning and creative relearning and transformative learning. So I invite our dear and respected Paul Bhai to please present your lecture.
There. Well, thank you, Anantabai. I'm really pleased to be here. I've been in Chennai now for 2 days, and I have to admit I'm kind of overwhelmed by the city. It's quite a multitude of things that I'm still trying to take in and process, although I'm very happy to be here. And I'm very happy to have the opportunity to discover a little bit about ChittaRanjan Das. This has been my first attempt to read him, and so what I'm going to present tonight is an exploration for my part, a first reading, a learning of his work and his insights, and trying to touch base with what I know about Ivan Illich. So I thought I would start by giving you two quotations that give a feel for the two authors. The first is from ChittaRanjan Das. It's from an essay he wrote called "To Possess is the Shortest Cut." He says, "When you cannot love, you possess. To possess is easier. Those of us who really want the world to be different, more human, and therefore nearer to God, who are willing to cooperate in the ushering in of such a world, will never go for the shortcut by possessing God, cutting God down to our petty size. On the contrary, we shall learn the art of opening ourselves up to others, being vulnerable and worthy. This is real humility, to feel that one has still a long way to go, to break down many walls and to come into real contact with other persons as persons." The second quotation is from the last chapter of Ivan Illich's book, written in 1970, called Deschooling Society. And in that chapter, he uses the myth of Prometheus, the classical myth of Prometheus, and the story of Pandora's box, which I'll talk about a little further. So this, Illich says, the history of modern humans is the history of the Promethean endeavor to forge institutions in order to corral each of the rampant ills of Pandora's box. It is the history of fading hope and rising expectations. To understand what this means, we must rediscover the distinction between hope and expectation. Hope, in its strongest sense, means trusting faith in the goodness of nature, while expectation, as I will use it here, means reliance on results which are planned and controlled by human beings. Hope centers desire on a person from whom we await a gift. Expectation looks forward to satisfaction from a predictable process which will produce what we have the right to claim. The Promethean ethos has now eclipsed hope. Survival of the human race depends on its rediscovery as a social force. In this presentation, I want to explore and bring into dialogue the work of two thinkers who are practitioners of social transformation, living in quite different contexts, but sharing a deep commitment to rethinking educational practice as a transformative force. Both Ivan Illich in North and South America and ChittaRanjan Das in Odisha, Europe, and India developed extensive critiques of how human learning had been co-opted for societal and political ends, and both generated alternative visions of a humane and hopeful reclamation of such learning. The quotations above suggest one of the deepest bases for such a dialogue. ChittaRanjan Das developed a sharp, critical contrast between possession, or potestas in Latin, and potentia, or potentiality, the powerful possibility of human self-opening to other persons. Illich, for his part, contrasted hope in the goodness of nature and the other person as a social force, on the one hand, and the insatiable expectations created by the Promethean process of human planning and control on the other. In each case, critique aims to leverage open a path for social transformation through the blockages created by the long sedimentation of institutions and the institutionalization upon learning. I confess at the outset, although I have been carried along by a study of Illich for many years, I am only beginning to know the work of ChittaRanjan Das through my friendship with Ananta Giri. Still, I hope that even this imbalance may yield a freshness of insight. I'm going to talk first about ChittaRanjan Das and the section I've entitled ChittaRanjan Das on potestas and potentia, on power and potentiality, learning the art of opening ourselves up to others. I can only refer briefly and in summary here to the context of the work of ChittaRanjan Das and to defer to others, especially John Clammer and Ananta Kumar Giri, who have examined it in detail. As a writer with many diverse foci, sociological, literary, and educational among them, Das is distinguished by the border-crossing qualities of his work, and in particular, by highlighting how literature expresses the deep cultural grammar of a society, and therefore can be seen as both analytic and prophetic. That's from John Clammer. The abiding focus of this approach, however, is not global or hegemonic, but indigenous and local. And precisely in that way, it may be seen to generate at the grassroots and among the forgotten ones, a new model of literary critique quite beyond and much richer than theories of post-colonialism. There is also a profoundly personal character to the work of Das, such a personal quality that is rooted, Ananta Giri has so eloquently said, in reverential practice, in tapasya, as a mode of being in the world, where we are patiently laboring to take the existing reality to a new evolutionary height, as well as to make the ascent to a higher level of consciousness and a more dignified and qualitative relationship with the existent self, with culture and society. That's quoting Ananta. The tapasya of personal and social transformation means, as Giri says more recently, that in this way, Das's critique opens out into an alternative model of institution, one that is based on relationships, sambadas, of an interpersonal nature. This is quoting Ananta. The significance of Das lies in his emphasis not on institutions as such, but on alternative relationships founded on intimacy, sincerity, and egolessness. Das believes that work on the transformation can begin with new sambadas, alternative relationships. It is these alternative relationships among individuals which can be the genealogical ground of new institutions, institutions which hold the key to the future. That's the end of Ananta's quote. These alternative relationships, sambadas, have the nature of interpersonal respect and indeed trusting practice, shraddha silata. Following both Gandhi and Sri Aurobindo, Das believes that this deep reverence for the other is hidden within us, and that the objective of education is to free this hidden reverence to the throbs of life. In an essay called Integral Education, Das himself refers approvingly to Aurobindo's three radical principles of education, namely, 1, that nothing can be taught, 2, that the mind must be consulted in its own education, and 3, that education must proceed from near to far. He goes on to note that taking up this path of integral education is in fact realizing as individuals the divine possibilities which are embedded in the world and in us. I will return to Das's views on integral education in a moment. I want to turn next, however, to his understanding of the background and the basis for this educational vision in a larger metaphysical view of the world shared by both Eastern traditions, Sri Aurobindo, and also by a deep reading of a Western thinker, Spinoza. The last comment shows not only the profound influence of Aurobindo on Das's understanding of education, but it links him in addition with another thinker who was and remains a pivotal voice of critique in the West, and stood at the gateway of the turning toward modernity, namely Benedict Spinoza, on whom Das wrote his doctoral dissertation. Das wrote his thesis entitled Benedict Spinoza, An Appreciation, when he was a 25-year-old student at Tagore's college, Shantiniketan. In the middle of it, he expresses his appreciation of how Spinoza gave pride of place to intuitive knowledge as a moment of integration of other forms of knowing, and he points out how this links him with both rich mystical and poetic traditions. For example, Jakob Böhme, the German mystic, and Keats, the English poet, and Fichte, and the more modern French philosopher Bergson. He also lauds Spinoza's finding of the individual in the whole and of the particular in the general. And he goes on to point out that this fundamental presentation of the human being as a human being in society and of the human mind as that which bears the essence of the eternal mind are rooted in Spinoza's fundamental reinterpretation of the immanence of divine substance, what is called in Latin natura naturans, as begetting and expressing itself in natura naturata, the being and becoming of all individualities. I'm sorry, this is getting sort of abstract, but I think it's important to realize this profound sense of immanence that Spinoza argued for, that God is part of God is the creation, God is in the creation and opening himself up to the development of the creation. Das examines Spinoza's position in great detail, however, and shows how this immanentization of the divine in Spinoza actually means the opposite, a radical opening up of ethical potential, because the divine opens itself to complete and utter determination in the many beings and the many facets of reality. Thus, Das concludes Spinoza's determinism only means self-determinism in ethics, never the absence of freedom. The self-realization of divine being happens in and through the self-realization of the many beings, all of us. Whole and part are intrinsically united, and all the parts are intrinsically open to each other in complete vulnerability. These metaphysical arguments have a great impact on the conception of individuality, the whole of being and their interrelationships, of course, And Das will spend a great deal of time developing and applying these insights. For one thing, they must mean, according to Das, that education is always mutual. It is by developing humans' potentialities that they can be educated, he says. That is to say that education essentially evolves and emerges from below, from within each human being in their concatenation with others, their reverberation together. It cannot be controlled or legislated from above. Spinoza writes, as Das notes approvingly, governments should never found academies, for they serve more to oppress than to encourage genius. As Das realizes, however, this view of ethics and education and potentiality of openness to others has been negated and sidelined by the dominant traditions of Western philosophy, and hence he begins his profound analysis of power as power over and potentiality. The Western mind, he argues, and this is a quotation, suffers from the mania of possession. Its delight is in conquering a thing. Thus it conquers land, conquers space and time, conquers nature. Its politics conquers other humans to its own dominion. In society, it conquers its neighbors to its own advantage. In religion, it conquers the pagans to the holy kingdom. Its philosophy is thus individualistic, singing the glory of the isolated individual who owns the world by conquest. But the person of the East has always glorified union. Instead of conquering things to submission, they have realized that their greatness by uniting themselves with the Brahma or the larger whole. That's the end of the quotation from Das. In light of this, Das will later develop and explain Spinoza's crucial distinction between power and potentiality. And this is quoting Das again. Benedict Spinoza has spoken about potestas and potentia, words both of which in the Latin language mean power. They are different in their import because they point to different connotations. The former, potestas, is functionally the urge to possess by bossing it over others. And potentia reminds us about the potentials inherent in every human being, the many possibilities of flowering up and unfolding. If freedom is the climate in which it develops. According to Spinoza, love is the mediating link between knowledge and power. Love of humanity, love of the world, deep faith in the unending possibilities of us as individuals as well as collectives. This calls for a higher consciousness which all knowledge should congenially aim at. That's the end of the quotation from Das. With this distinction in mind as a critical tool, Das will return to reflect on education, inspired as he was by both Spinoza and his mentor Sri Aurobindo. Aurobindo, for his part, drew upon the long-standing Indian traditions emphasizing the spiritual, the collective, and the call for a higher consciousness. But also he radicalized them by turning the tradition's emphasis on self-transcendence and escape from physical dimensions into a new kind of ethical practice. As Das explains, Sri Aurobindo said, God has not created this world, he has become this world. He is this world. This really changed the very axioms. The divine is infinite possibilities, Sri Aurobindo declared, and the possibilities have yet to be realized here by us as individuals and in the collective. The aim of yoga is the spiritualization of society or of humanity, if you choose to say so. The entire tone is one of affirmation. Ancient Indian wisdom had, of course, sung of the soul that is within each of us, but it had imagined it as imprisoned, waiting to be released from the thraldom. There have been moral codes, prescribed religions, and the like, but the utter aim was an escape. All this was recommended to be undergone to qualify yourself for the release. There was no emphasis upon changing the world to make it worthy of the divine within you. One has only to live out one's stigma of karma and then get away into the contemplated supreme bliss. That's the end of the quotation. In what seems to me a particularly important retrospective essay written in 1996, Integral Education, The Vision and an Experiment, Das explains the meaning of this radical insight of Aurobindo for education. Thus he notes, the divine is the truth and the agent behind the unfolding, and its counterpart in the human individual is what Sri Aurobindo calls psychic being. To say it figuratively with him, the divine is an eternal child playing an eternal game in an eternal garden. What strikes me as especially important here is precisely this metaphor of the game played in the garden by an eternal child. It is important, I think, for the stark contrast it sets up with the previous and lower stage of the mind, which was at work in the development of science and technology, with which we are all still so thoroughly mesmerized. The phase of mind as a first birth, Das notes, sets up a very necessary infrastructure, but is also plagued by ego and its desires and is continually hungry for more, chasing its own tail, as it were. Mind acts on the principle of division, compares, has a hunger that seeks to devour, and is precariously ensnared by I-ness and my senses, he says. Yet Aurobindo sees, as Das explains, that this state has to be transcended. By choosing to get beyond the present parochialisms, there will be a further ascent at the ladder of consciousness. Life as it is will then voluntarily aspire for the life that might be. The renewal of life of the human individual will result in the renewal of the community. The renewal of life of the human individual, the divine community will be born and life will be a life divine. It will further translate itself into changes in all walks of our lives, economics, political arrangements, art, culture, and literature. For Das, it is toward the self-liberation of human beings from the traps of their own ego mind that education has to be directed, toward the emergence of a psychic world which frees and connects all being again to each other in community. As he says very poetically, the child has to be approached as a storehouse of possibilities, as a soul that carries the divine within it. Whatever education it receives by way of schooling ought to nourish the soul that is waiting to grow and unfold itself. Hence, it should follow all education should be imparted in an atmosphere of freedom, should be built upon the belief that the human being is basically good and willing to cooperate in their own education and unfoldment. This approach has to be one of invitation, not of command. The relationship between pupils and their teacher will be one that inspires joy, unreserved participation, and a mutuality that respects and recognizes the learner on either side. This is, of course, just the opposite of the education as we find it currently in the world. Since state-managed education serves primarily the interests of the state in producing obedient citizens and of training young people to submit to power, to see only a small part of the human being and to repress a large part of their own potentiality, such education is a sacrilege, Das says. For the human being is not to be used by tyrants. They are to flower in a fully functioning entity, fully aspiring so that they may be fit to give themselves fully in the fulfillment of the evolutionary scheme. Indeed, all notion of the power of superiority, the superiorities of status, of age, of knowledge, needs to be overturned. He says the approach has to be essentially individual, dialogical, based on an I-thou relationship. No person, including the young ones, should be treated as a thing. This kind of education, the teacher is also opened up in their vulnerability and transformed. This is because, as Das says in another essay, Society and Literature, to be and not merely to know is the real thing, the real catalyzer. Leaving behind the sannyasins of the intellect, clinging to the idols of the caves, and casting light out unto the world, ought instead to help us stand erect and fight the darkness around ourselves. Only a personal revolution would give us real backbones. Jnana, knowledge, becomes real and mature only when it is translated into karma, action, both individual and corporate. That's my first reading through of ChittaRanjan Das. I want to turn now to Illich, and I'm sure you'll hear from the beginning the resonances with what I've just said. I'm going to focus on his use of the metaphor of Pandora's box and Prometheus. I find this call from ChittaRanjan Das profound and compelling. It immediately sparks a point of comparison and dialogue with the work of Ivan Illich, and so I want to begin by elaborating those and explaining the different contexts in which Illich's work arises. I noted at the outset that Illich's attempt to show a stark contrast between the Promethean model of expectation founded on the process of human control and the open-endedness of hope, relying as it does on a trusting relationship with the goodness of nature and a vulnerable openness to other human beings. Illich elaborates on this in the last chapter of his book, Deschooling Society. That work emerged from a lengthy collaborative dialogue that was carried out at the Centro Intercultural de Documentación in Cuernavaca in Mexico. Illich had founded that center in 1965 as a reaction to the Pope's call to send many missionaries to Latin America. Illich, who had by then retired as a priest to become a solitary wanderer and a maverick intellectual, was very concerned to de-Yankify and retrain such priests for their experience in a radically different culture. His center and its concerns grew out of his earlier experience working in a Puerto Rican parish in New York City and later in Puerto Rico itself. In both contexts, he experienced profound cultural gaps and neo-colonial blind spots. His dialogue with and differences from Paulo Freire and other proponents of liberation theology, just beginning to emerge then and continued throughout the next decade. Indeed, Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, written in 1972, and Illich's Deschooling Society offer radically different but parallel attempts to articulate alternative models of education. Freire's work emphasized literacy, radical democratization, critical conscientization, and a dialectical view of technological modernization. He said, for example, the answer does not lie in the rejection of the machine, but in the humanization of the human being. In other words, a critical acceptance of modernity under the conditions of justice and equity for all. That's my characterization of Freire's position. Illich, by contrast, was thoroughly critical of the institutionalizing framework of modernity in all its forms, seeing it as dismissing and distorting the innate human abilities of self-knowledge and understanding. For him, Homo sapiens, the human being of wisdom, was forced to become Homo educandus, the human being in need of education, and later the human being in need of Homo programmandus, in need of being programmed. Thus, Illich came to oppose a negative view of education as the industrialized formula. He called it learning under the condition of scarcity. I'll say a little more about that as we go along, but our economy is really structured on that scarcity, that concept of scarcity. I don't have enough. I will never have enough. I always need more, and that's what keeps the economy churning. And education has been structured in the same way. I don't know enough. I can't get enough degrees. I can't succeed enough. In other words, I have no knowledge. I need to receive it from others, and it is valuable to be sought after and coveted. By contrast, Illich said, the fact that people have always known many things and managed to live decently, even amid conditions of hardship, when left to their autonomous devices. So that's what he means by Homo sapiens. This position, it seems to me, clearly puts Illich on common ground with ChittaRanjan Das. I want to turn now an overview to Illich's argument concerning education. In the last chapter of Deschooling, Illich points to the first shift embodied in the Promethean myth to reject notions of human fate and destiny. By stealing fire from the gods, Prometheus turned facts into problems. He argues, Greek tragedy continued this defiance by acknowledging the risks to human beings that it entailed. Contemporary human beings go further still, creating an entirely human-made environment without acknowledging that they can do so only on the condition of constantly remaking themselves to fit into it. to the extent that we now see clearly that our own actions in the desire for more and acquiring and growing and solving problems are really putting the whole human future at risk. Illich illustrates this envelope of expectations and institutions with a very poetic account of a child growing up in New York City whose everyday life produces a very peculiar vision of what is and what can be. I think the same thing could be said for Chennai. The child is surrounded by and touches only what has been scientifically developed, engineered, and planned and sold to someone, Illich says. Moreover, the child's own desires and fears are institutionally shaped. And here we come to Illich's sense of how institutionalized education itself becomes a sealed envelope enclosing the human being. Learning itself is defined as the consumption of subject matter, which is the result of research, planned, and promoted programs. Whatever good there is the product of some specialized institution. They cannot expect anything which lies outside. Even their fantasy is prompted to produce science fiction. They can experience the poetic surprise of the unplanned only in the dirt, the blunder, or in failure. Yet ironically, this is a continually rising tide of expectations for things which are never quite enough and always just beyond our reach. This is the economic model of scarcity, which I was talking about earlier, which drove the mythical Tantalus in hell with an unquenchable thirst and hunger. He was standing in a river from which he couldn't drink the water, and the trees which had fruit in them were just beyond his reach. For Illich, that is a very apt image of where we are as modern human beings. Surrounded by all powerful tools, the human being is reduced to being a tool of his tools. Each of the institutions meant to exercise one of the primal evils has become a failsafe, a self-sealing coffin for the human being. The human being is trapped in the boxes he makes to contain the ills that Pandora allowed to escape. The blackout of reality and the smog produced by our tools has enveloped us. Quite suddenly, we find ourselves in the darkness of our own trap. The drivenness of expectations, which create needs faster than they can create satisfaction, and their institutionalization in the hands of experts and systems create a never-ending process of trying to meet the needs they generate. Moreover, in this way, the reliance on process has displaced dependence on personal goodwill. And this really comes to the crux of what Illich wants to say. If, as he argues, the ethos of never enough non-satiety is at the root of physical depredation, social polarization, and psychological passivity, the only way out, as Illich suggests, is a renewal of deep interhuman satisfaction of hopeful trust in one another. He imagines in this light the development of educational webs which heighten the opportunity for each one to transform each moment of their living into one of learning, sharing, and caring. In a work which develops this vision further, Convivial Tools, written in 1973, Illich coins the term conviviality as an inner critical key to guide both his critique and to reopen the inherently encompassing claims of technology. Conviviality, as he says, means autonomous and creative intercourse among persons and the intercourse of persons with their environment. And this in contrast to the conditioned response of persons to demands made upon them by others and by a human-made environment. I consider conviviality to be individual freedom realized in personal interdependence, and as such as an intrinsic ethical value. Notice that he does not speak of the abstract notion of technology, but rather of tool, something that remains on the scale of human use. Listen to this description of a convivial tool and reflect on the way they foster and encourage freedom in their user. Tools foster conviviality to the extent that they can be easily used by anybody, as often or as seldom as desired for the accomplishment of a purpose chosen by the user. The use of such tools by one person does not restrain another person from using them equally. They do not require previous certification of the user. Their existence does not impose any obligation on to use them. The use allows they allow the user to express their meaning in action. Contrast that with the technologies evolved from fossil fuels. In my country, we have reconstructed an entire parallel way of life for the car around highways and shopping malls and suburbs. Walking around Chennai the last few days, I have felt the more immediate impact of cars and scooters weaving in and out among the pedestrians, honking at every turn. Somehow the contrast and conflict is easier to feel here. Human life is being slowly woven into the infrastructure of the car, too. On the other hand, a musical instrument seems to be a convivial tool. Although it requires a dedicated path of learning to be used, it is a way of opening paths to self-expression and a communion with others, a way of evoking and celebrating joys and sorrows, an instrument that leads us beyond mere pleasures and pains, inconveniences and problems to be solved. Of course, music can also become a consumable and can be taken up into Spotify to be entertaining and anesthetizing. A more complex example of a convivial tool is the internet in general, where on the one hand, we can connect as we are now across time and space and culture to share ideas, experiences, and to learn from each other and have a kind of presence together. But behind that, or alongside that, there is the way in which these technological connections with strangers can come to mesmerize us, encourage us to forget ourselves and manipulate our feelings and ideas as we scroll through Facebook or TikTok. In the last sense, we are left empty and estranged from ourselves. And so it seems to me that there is a great promise and a great threat in this technology. In all of these cases, Illich's critical notion of conviviality allows us to reflect on the human technological interface in insightful ways. Although, as one observer notes, Illich was sometimes partial to pessimistic views, he ultimately remained married to the hope for post-industrial conditions. And so he spent much of his life imagining and creating convivial tools. He thought of these as appropriate and congenial alternatives to tools of domination. Convivial tools promote learning, sociality, community, autonomous and creative intercourse among persons, and the intercourse of persons with their environment. In his last works, Illich was looking more deeply into the body and the senses and trying to see how they were subtly being reshaped by our surrounding technologies. In this regard, too, he was aiming, as one of his contemporaries, Gustavo Esteves, said, to reinstate human agency. Ivan reinstated our agency, our personal capacity to act with friends by giving us back the sense of proportion, the sense we lost in the hubris of modernity and the patriarchal arrogance that brought us to the extremes of violence we are living today. Finally, Illich invoked for himself the myth of Prometheus, not the myth of Prometheus, but of his brother Epimetheus, or hindsight, reflection. As he says in the conclusion to deschooling, we need a name for those who collaborate with their Promethean brother in the lighting of the fire and the shaping of iron, but who do so to enhance their ability to attend and care and wait upon the other, knowing that to each his world is private, and that in that world one excellent moment, and in that world one tragic moment. I suggest that these hopeful brothers and sisters be called Epimethean. In his later writings, Illich will turn more directly to the Christian tradition and apply this critique at the heart of the tradition, which he sees embodied in the story of the Good Samaritan, namely, the one who makes himself the neighbor of the utter stranger by his profound act of love. He is critical of the tradition for turning this into an abstract theory, such as charity, and also for trying to institutionalize that charity with practices of confession and penance. For him, it is a corruption of what is most important, which turns it into what is worse. The Latin phrase for that is corruptio optima pessima est. That is to say, it turns the spontaneous, hopeful act of opening oneself to the other into a process of expectations. The Samaritan, the Epimethean human being, remains a parable to inspire and redirect our thought and our action toward the other. I'll just say one or two things about the two of them in conclusion. It is obvious to me from this overview that there are profound reverberations between the views of the two thinkers. On the deepest level, there is a mutual affirmation of the inner richness of the human being, a richness of potentia for self-giving and of openness to the other and hope. Das elaborates beautifully on the foreground and background of this vulnerable openness by drawing on both ethical traditions of Tapasya and Sambadas and on the metaphysical traditions of Spinoza and Aurobindo within the divine evolutionary process. Of course, there are critical arguments to be made in order to free these traditions from their forms of egotistical individualization and to move from jnana to it for its own sake to the realm of action, karma, and to insist on inherent mutuality. As I've just tried to show, Illich does the same kind of thing with his Christian tradition by re-evoking the story of the Good Samaritan and trying to enliven its inherent claim as a parable, which asks each of us, who is your neighbor? Who is the one to whom you should open yourself in vulnerability and unquestioning love? Illich has developed this problematic account of human ego in some important detail, I think, in its contrast between Homo sapiens and Homo educandus and programmandus, the being with inner wisdom and the beings in need of education and programming, is a very telling one. The larger critique which animates his work and continues to be valuable as a way of discerning the ways and extent to which we have succumbed to the processes and false hopes of expectation, the economies, the educational claims of never enough or scarcity, his hope to find convivial tools to free ourselves from the cycle of scarcity, to find tools with which we retain our agency, is very compelling. And yet the fact remains that we are and continue to be in many ways the tools of our own tools and of the larger systems of education. In this light, I want to ask finally, and as we stand on the cusp of the unknown digital revolutions promised by AI, have we actually deluded ourselves about our freedom as agents? Is the hope, the Gandhian and Tolstoyan hope of inner freedom, of satya and satyagraha, only a romantic illusion? Or can we realize it? And with that, I leave my question open to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your very, detailed presentation and bringing Spinoza. Am I audible? Yeah. So bringing Spinoza and Aurobindo together and both the things parallelly, even Illich and Chittavai. Now we will invite some discussions, reflections. I would like to invite Dr. Christian Bartolf to share his views and reflection. Dr. Christian Bartolf, please.
Thank you for giving me the chance to speak to you. Actually, I would like to respond to this excellent lecture which we heard and to the question you asked in the last sentences referring the message of Gandhi with respect to Ivan Illich, and remind us that Ivan Illich wrote these wonderful thoughts about the message of Bapu's hut, where he summarized all the virtues Gandhi meant to him in the year 1978. So it has been published in The Mirror of the Past, New York, London, 1992. And in case you find time, I will be more than pleased to read this message of Bapu's hut by Ivan Illich to you. It's a small text, but only if time permits.
Thank you. So we will collect all the reflections together and allow him to speak at the end. So next I invite Dr. Gan Luigi.
Yes, thank you very much. I am compelled to attend the webinar from my smartphone because my computer has some problems. It was very interesting. Unfortunately, well, I cannot put on the video. I am sorry. Well, I was meditating
Okay, you can just
on the
have your.
question. Excuse me, because it's really perhaps you can see me, but I cannot. Well, anyway, I was particularly interested in the suggestions on Spinoza, and I would like to ask whether you can add something about it because it was very interesting for me. Also, because I am dealing with Spinoza in this period, and therefore I would like to hear to ask whether you can possibly elaborate on the subject. I thank you very much. It was really very interesting. I am sorry that I deeply apologize that I have these problems with the connection today. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I invite Dr. Basanti Mahanti. Dr. Basanti Mahanti is a writer and professor. She's from Odisha. Basanti Appa, please.
Thank you, Minati. I learned much from the our respected speakers, Spinoza and Chitta to the educationist. The Chitta always important gave importance on education. Jivana Vidyalaya, Sampati Munda, he also emphasized on open university to deschooling, about deschooling. Thank you. I learned a lot of things from our speakers. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So now I request Dr. Amir. You can share your reflections. Hello, Amir bhai. Okay, as he is taking some time, now I would invite Professor David Blake Wills. Please, you can share your opinions and reflections.
Thank you, Minati, and I'm so sorry to join later. We just arrived back in the United States, and I was confused by 1 hour by the time zone here, but I'm sure Paul really had some interesting comments. I'm looking forward to the recording. I'm so sorry that I joined later. I did enjoy the comments by Gian and Christian and Dr. Basanti just now. So sorry I can't really comment. However, well, I guess I could mention I had a correspondence with Ivan Illich and met him a number of times back in the 1980s. And his work had a tremendous impact on me as an educator. I'm now in my 50th year of teaching, and I have to say that Ivan Illich is really a guiding light for me in a lot of different ways. And my goodness, his impact seems to have faded a bit, which I'm very disappointed about, but I'm sure it will be coming back given the importance of his thought. So just a few comments there.
Thank you. So next, Professor Makar Dhoj, please.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry I late. The talk went late and so I just like to say that this is a very insightful talk, and I came to know about the linkage between the ChittaRanjan, the education system, and the Illich deschooling society. So that is very insightful. So far, I have no questions, but it's insightful for me. I will explore more on this topic. Thank you, ma'am.
Any other friends who would volunteer to ask a question or share their reflection? Anyone? Like GC Ratha or PK Shashidharan or Aurobindo Behra? You can come in this, and Mr. Sudhir, you can come in this order and can share your queries or reflections. Okay, as no one is coming, so I just have one query to Paul Bhai. At least, you know, like you were talking about Homo sapiens and Homo equus. Can you just elaborate a little bit about it? So, Anant Bhai, would you like to ask any queries, or at the end I will invite you to give the closing remarks?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much, our dear Paul Bhai and all our gifters of insights. As we work and meditate with Chitta Bhai and Ivan Illich together, vis-a-vis education is also the calling of language, and resonating with the spirit of truth and personal intimacy, the whole journey with language. Ivan Illich was also a critic of instrumental use of language. I think his book, Alphabetization of the World, puts up that challenge. And Chitta Bhai, in his meditation on language, was also deeply concerned about how do we cultivate language which would be a vehicle of our human heart. So possibly, dear Paul, a little bit of reflection on Illich's view on language, and then we can discover possible pathways of resonance with Chitta Bhai. Thank you.
Would you like me to respond now?
Yes, you can. You can. I think all these queries are given.
Well, thank you all very much for your questions and thoughts. I'm sorry to have tried your patience with just a long discourse. I really appreciate the person who mentioned Bapu's hut. That I think is a really important text. Illich took some inspiration from Gandhi, I think, and it's worth exploring that. I can't say too much off the cuff about that, but I will look at that text again. And I feel the same way with what Ananta said about language. I would like to reflect a little bit on the question of language and the relation that both of them had with it, the way in which it could become a form of control and tightening, and the way in which it could also be loosened and become a form of self-expression. I guess at the end, I was reflecting on my own queries about how do we keep alive this spirit of searching for the personal and the inherent goodness of each other in a world which is more and more controlled and shaped by technology that is beyond us. It seems to me that's a problem I carry with me every day, and I don't have a simple answer to it. In a way, I was happy to discover Spinoza's insights and his firm conviction in the unfolding of the divine in creation, as someone mentioned, John Luigi, I think. And I intend to spend more time reading Spinoza now. I think after seeing him through Chitta Bhai's eyes, he had some very important things to say. David mentioned or thought about the fading impact of Ivan Illich, and I think that's true. There are other things, many other traditions which are more fashionable and compelling now in the West, at least. I still find myself deeply attracted to Illich for his independence and for the depth of insight there, the sense of struggling with all of the tools. You know, I was thinking tonight we ended up in a hotel, and I was the elevator was there, and everyone was encouraging us to go on the elevator. And I thought, well, you know, you push the button and you stand there, but actually walking up and down the stairs is a much better thing. It keeps my agency, and stairs are a very convivial tool. So I'm starting to see that language as a critical way of looking at the world around me. And I think that that's very helpful. Anyway, I don't know if that spurs any other thoughts. I'd be happy to hear them if it does.
So I had one not query actually. I wanted to listen a little more about that you were putting, Homo sapiens and Homo educanus. Those
Yeah.
little bit more, please.
Yes. I think that he's drawing on his classical background there, but you know, I think the rooted idea in the Western tradition was that human beings had an innate wisdom, Homo sapiens. There was a wisdom embodied in our humanity, and somehow as we shifted to the modern context, and I think if you read Descartes, you know, and there's a sense of the emptiness of the mind. We don't know anything. We can't be sure of anything. We have to question everything. Or you look at someone like Thomas Hobbes, we're not inherently good. We're inherently bad and need to be controlled. Those views of modernity are the views that lead us to think, well, we have to educate human beings. We have to give them the tools to become better. In the sense, we have to govern them. We have to program them to act in a way that so that they fit in and are obedient. So that's very much what Illich means by Homo educandus, the human being in need of education, or the human being in need of being programmed. And I think if you look at, I've talked to a lot of young people on this trip. They all are yearning to receive something that they don't have. That's the way they look at education, because education has been presented to them as, if you get this degree or that degree, you can go to America and become an engineer or whatever. You know, this sense of continually climbing up and up and up when your life, which I understand. I mean, we live in that kind of society, and we're all taught that from our youth. But Illich was trying to recover the opposite sense, that we're born with an inherent capacity to love and to connect with others.
Thank you. Ananta Bhai, any concluding remarks from you?
Yes, thank you, Minati. Our friend Christian wanted to read a passage from a writer.
Yeah.
And then after that, I have forwarded a song to be played. So let us listen to this. Then after that, and in the meantime, I also have another thought, dear Paul Bhai. You mentioned Gustavo Esteva, and I was visiting his center in 2005, and in Mexico and in Oaxaca. And he was reading Ivan Illich Tools of Conviviality. It was like a study companion. So if you
Sorry, I lost you there, Ananta.
No, Ananta Bhai please unmute Ananta Bhai. He's muted.
Okay.
I heard you say that he was reading Illich's Tools of Conviviality.
Hello, Anantabhai, can you hear us?
Yeah. Now you can hear me, I suppose. You can
Yeah.
hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, like Esteba and his friends, it is almost like, reading tools of conviviality as a life wisdom, as a kind of a companion book. Similarly, if you can reflect a bit from your world journey, any other individual and institutions, who have really engaged with Illich in this ways. Of course, he had a very large following, but the kind of, engagement that we see in people like Esteba was much more than just a thinker. So it was really a life influence on his life and in the life of his institution. If you can share a bit.
Would you like me to do that now?
Yes, yes. He was asking you to share about.
I think you're right. Illich, I didn't know him, but he seems to have had a very engaging personality. There's another Canadian named David Cayley who has spent his life interviewing Illich and has written several collections of his work, and most recently a big biography of Illich. And he talks about this personal character that Illich had, this ability to connect with people. So I think he very much embodied what he was talking about. He was a person who was open, who allowed himself to be vulnerable, and connect with people in that way. And they opened up in turn by connecting with him. That's my sense, in any case, from the reading. And so I think his influence was deeper than just intellectual. His ideas are important, but people took them to heart and tried to embody them in their life. And it seems to me that that must have been the case with ChittaRanjan as well. He had a strong personal impact on the people that he worked with and taught, and also, yeah, I see Paulo Freire coming up in the questions there. That would be something I'd love to explore further, the connection between Ivan Illich and Paulo Freire. That dialogue went on for quite a long time. I just skimmed it a bit here, and especially on the question of technology. I read an interesting article about contrasting the two views, that Freire was more open to technology if it was democratized, whereas Illich was pretty skeptical about technology and wanted to be suspicious of it right to the end, I think. Anyway, those are my final thoughts.
So thank you. Now, Professor Dr. Christian Bartolfo, he wanted to read one. Christian sir, over to you.
In January 1978, Ivan Illich came to Sevagram ashram to inaugurate a conference. During the stay, he spent his maximum time sitting in Gandhiji's hut. He tried to imbibe the spirit of peace and expressed it in his inimitable style in his inaugural speech to the conference. Here is a unique tribute to the hut and what it stands for. The Message of Bapu's Hut by Ivan Illich. Friends, today in the morning while I was sitting in this hut where Mahatma Gandhi lived, I was trying to absorb the spirit of this concept and imbibe in me its message. There are two things about the hut which have impressed me greatly. One is its spiritual aspect, and the other is the aspect of his amenities. I was trying to understand Gandhi's point of view in regard to making the hut. I very much liked its simplicity, beauty, and neatness. The hut proclaims the principle of love and equality with everybody. Since the house which has been provided to me in Mexico is in many ways like this hut, I could understand its spirit. Here I found that the hut has 7 kinds of places. As you enter, there is a place where you put down your shoes and prepare yourself physically and mentally to go into hut. Then comes the central room, which is big enough to accommodate a big family. Today in the morning at 4, when I was sitting there for prayer, 4 people along with me were sitting by supporting themselves to one wall, and on the other side also there was place enough for as many people if they sit together. This room is where everybody can go and join others. The third space is where Gandhiji himself sat and worked. There are 2 more rooms, one for the guest and for the sick. There is an open veranda and also commodious bathroom. All of these places have a very organic relationship. I feel that if rich people come to this hut, they must be making fun of it. When I look from the point of view of a simple Indian, I do not see why there should be a house bigger than this. This house is made of wood and mud. In its making, it is not the machine, but the hands of men which have worked. I call it a hut, but it is really a home. There is a difference between a house and a home. The house is where man keeps his luggage and furniture. It is meant more for the security and convenience of the furniture than of the man himself. In Delhi, where I've been put up, it was a house where there are many conveniences. The building is constructive from the point of view of these conveniences. It is made of cement and bricks, and is like a box where the furniture and other conveniences can fit in well. We must understand that all the furniture and other articles that we go on collecting in our lives will never give us the inner strength. These are, so to say, the crutches of a cripple. The more of such conveniences we have, the more our dependence on them increases and our life gets restrictive. On the contrary, the kind of furniture I find in Gandhiji's hut is of a different order, as there's very little cause of being dependent on them. A house fitted with all kinds of conveniences shows that we have become weak. The more we lose the power to live, the greater we depend upon the goods we acquire. It is like our depending upon the hospitals for the health of the people and upon the schools for the education of our children. Unfortunately, both hospitals and schools are not an index of the health or the intelligence of a nation. Actually, the number of hospitals is indicative for the ill health of the people and schools of their ignorance. Similarly, the multiplicity of the facilities for living minimizes the expression of creativity in human life. Unfortunately, the paradox of the situation is that those who have more such conveniences are regarded as superior creatures. Will it not be considered an immoral society where illness is given more importance and those who use artificial legs are considered superior? While sitting in Gandhiji's hut, I was grieved to ponder over this perversity. I have come to the conclusion that it is wrong to think of the industrial civilization as a road leading towards development of man. It has been proved that for our economic development, bigger and bigger machines of production and larger number of engineers, doctors, and professors are not necessary. I am convinced that such people are poor in mind, body, and lifestyle who would want to have a place bigger than this hut where Gandhi lived. I have pity for them. By doing this, they surrender themselves and their animate self to the inanimate structure. By doing this, they surrender themselves and their animate self to the inanimate structure. In the process, they lose the elasticity of their body and vitality of their life. They have little relationship with nature and closeness with their fellow men. When I ask the planners of the day why they do not understand the simple approach which Gandhiji taught us, they say that Gandhiji's way is very difficult and that the people will not be able to follow it. But the reality of the situation is that since Gandhiji's principles do not tolerate the presence of any middleman or that of a centralized system, the planners and managers and politicians have very little attraction towards it. How is not being understood? How is it because people feel that untruth and violence will take them to the desired objective? No, this is not so. The common man fully understands that right means will take him to the right end. It is only the people who have some vested interest who refuse to understand it. The rich do not want to understand. When I say rich, I mean all those people who have got conveniences of life which are not available to everybody in common. These are in living, eating, and going about. Their modes of consumption are such that they have been deprived of the power to understand the truth. It is to these that Gandhi becomes a difficult proposition to understand and assimilate. They are the ones to whom simplicity does not make any sense. Their circumstances, unfortunately, do not allow them to see the truth. Their lives have become too complicated to enable them to get out of trap they are in. Fortunately, for the largest number of people, there is neither so much of wealth that they become immune to the truth of simplicity, nor are they in such penury that they lack the capacity to understand. Even if the rich see the truth, they refuse to understand it. It is because they have lost their contact with the soul of this country. It should be very clear that the dignity of man is possible only in a self-sufficient society, and that it suffers as they move towards progressive industrialization. This hut connotes the pleasures that are possible through being at par with society. Here, self-sufficiency is the keynote. We must understand that unnecessary articles and goods that a man possesses reduce his power to imbibe happiness from the surroundings. Therefore, Gandhi repeatedly said that productivity should be kept within the limits of wants. Today's mode of production is such that it finds no limit and goes on increasing uninhibited. All these we have been tolerating so far, but the time has come when man must understand that by depending more and more on machines, he is moving towards his own suicide. The civilized world, whether it is China or America, has begun to understand that if we want to progress, this is not the way. Man should realize that for the good of the individual as well as of the society, it is best that people keep for themselves only as much as is sufficient for their immediate needs. We have to find a method by which this thinking finds expression in changing the values of today's world. This change cannot be brought about by the pressure of the governments or through centralized institutions. A climate of public opinion has to be created to make people understand that which constitutes the basic society. Today, The man with a motor car thinks himself superior to the man with a bicycle, though. When we look at it from the point of view of the common norm, it is the bicycle which is the vehicle of the masses. The cycle, therefore, must be given the prime importance, and all the planning in roads and transport should be done on the basis of the bicycle, whereas the motor car should get a secondary place. The actual situation, however, is the reverse, and all plans are made for the benefit of the motor car, giving a second place to the bicycle. Common man's requirements are thus disregarded in comparison with those of the higher ups. This hut of Gandhi demonstrates to the world how the dignity of the common man can be brought up. It is also a symbol of happiness which we can derive from practicing the principles of simplicity, service, and truthfulness. I hope that in the conference that you are going to hold on techniques for the third world poor, you will try to keep this message before you. So maybe I just end by saying that I met Professor Ivan Illich, to my great joy, in Berlin, in the university. And this was the same he expressed. He recommended us to be our own automobile. Automobile, you see, without any techniques, without any machine. Automobile. So let us pray for the soul of Ivan Illich and all in his spirit, just by walking and meditating. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear Christian. If you can kindly play that sent video, I'm grateful to you. I have sent through WhatsApp a video.
Yes. Shall I do?
And will take a few minutes. And as he is playing the video, I just want to mention, dear Paul Bhai and friends, that speaking about the bicycle, Chitta Bhai used to bicycle. So he had a bicycle in his, living place. He would bicycle to even great distances. He would visit the schools in his bicycle. Okay,
Great.
dear Christian, now the music, please.
It takes some seconds.
Okay.
Christian sir, is it
yes,
the option is coming? The
yes,
option for sharing is coming? Okay.
Yes, I can play it if you. I just try to share my screen, and I hope that you can listen to the sound. So if not, then let us see.
Then I'll make you host then.
Please.
I think now it will be possible. Yeah, you can see.
There is no sound.
Volume. Yeah.
Can you put the volume, Christian? Is it possible?
You hear?
That volume
Can
was
the
not there. Yeah, you can increase the volume little bit.
Let us start then again, yes?
Yeah.
So if you can listen to the sound, then I start again, yes?
Yes, please increase the volume and tell us. Is it coming, Christian, the volume? Have you increased the volume? We cannot hear the sound.
So then it seems to me that I'm not able to share the video with sound, whatever the
Okay.
reason might be. So sorry, but I just give the link. Maybe someone else can. So I just give the link of the video in the chat. So maybe someone else is able to play the video with the sound. Okay.
So possibly with the technical difficulty, we would move ahead. We thank you, Christian, for your deep, gift of Ivan Illich later. Thank you. And now, Minotti, you can move towards the concluding moment.
Yeah, I also tried. It is not playing in this. It is playing in other platforms. It is playing with music. With this, it is sound is not coming. I think. Okay, we can go towards vote of thanks.
But let me just say one line about this song. And the song from Tagore says, "Khyama karo, khyama karo." And I thought that spirit of forgiveness, and in a way that, remembering Chittavai on this day and Ivan Illich, that we seek forgiveness. And I thought that the spirit of forgiveness from these two creative souls, that they have done so much. Maybe we are not yet up to it. We are doing our best, and we seek forgiveness from nature and divine. Now, Minati, please.
Thank you, Anantavai. I, Minati Pradhan, on behalf of Sodhya Chakra and Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, with immense pleasure in my heart, I would like to thank our chief speaker, Paul Vai, for our first ChittaRanjan Das Memorial Lecture. Thank you so much for presenting us, a very beautiful topic of ChittaRanjan Das and Ivan Illich. I also would like to thank Dr. Christian Battle for bringing Ivan Illich and Gandhi together. It was, another type of learning. Thank you so much, sir. And I also would like to thank Dr. Gyan Luigi, Dr. Vasanti Mahanti, Professor David Blake Williams, Professor Mokardoj, and the people who are present with us today, like Amir, Mr. J.C. Ratho, Mr. Shudhir, Mr. Sashidharan, Mr. Aravindo Behera, and the people who are learning with us in our Facebook platform and as well as our YouTube platform. I thank all of you. Please pardon me if I've forgotten anybody's name, but I really thank all of you being present with us and learning. Thank you all and good night. Thank you.
Thank you.